Warsaw 1942. The ghetto is a prison of brick and barbed wire, where hunger gnaws at every corner and the smell of death hangs in the air like a permanent fog. In the middle of this hell, there is an orphanage. Inside it, 200 children. Jewish children. Children who have lost everything. Their parents were taken, their homes destroyed, their futures erased. And in the center of this small island of hope, there is a man. A doctor, a teacher, a writer. His name is Janusz Korczak, and he has a choice that no human being should ever have to make. The Nazis have given the order. All children from the orphanage will be deported to Treblinka. Everyone knows what Treblinka means. It's not a work camp, it's not a relocation center. It's a death factory. Korczak could escape. He has friends, contacts, people willing to hide him. He could save himself. But here's the question that will haunt you for the rest of this video. Why would a man who could survive choose to walk hand in hand with 200 children straight into a gas chamber? This is not just a story about the Holocaust. This is a story about a decision that defies every human instinct for survival. It's about a man who looked evil in the face and said, "If you take them, you take me too." And the world forgot him. His name was erased from most history books. His sacrifice was buried under millions of other tragedies. But today, you're going to discover who Janusz Korczak really was, what he did in those final days inside the Warsaw Ghetto, and why his choice on that August morning in 1942 is one of the most powerful acts of love and resistance that history has ever witnessed. By the end of this video, you will know the truth that was hidden. You will understand why this teacher refused to abandon his children, and you will never forget his name again. Let's go back. Warsaw, 1939. Before the ghetto. Before the barbed wire. Before the yellow stars sewn onto coats. Janusz Korczak is already famous. He's 61 years old, a pediatrician respected throughout Poland, author of revolutionary books on children's rights, and host of a radio program where he talks directly to children as if they were adults capable of understanding the world. But his true home is not the radio studio or the hospital. His home is Dom Sierot, the orphanage he founded in 1912. There, Korczak has created something extraordinary. A small republic where children govern themselves, where they have their own court, their own newspaper, their own parliament. He treats them not as incomplete adults, but as full human beings with voices that deserve to be heard. Then September comes. The Nazis invade Poland. Warsaw falls. The occupation begins. And with it, a new world order is imposed. Jews are forced to wear armbands with the Star of David. Their businesses are confiscated. Their movements are restricted. Korczak watches as the walls of normality crumble around him. His books are banned. His radio show is cancelled. His hospital privileges are revoked. But he continues. He continues to care for his children. He continues to believe that somehow reason will prevail, that humanity will return, that this nightmare will end. Then in October 1940, the order comes. All Jews in Warsaw must move to a designated area, the ghetto, a neighborhood of less than 1.5 square miles that will be forced to hold over 400,000 people. The walls go up, brick by brick, 3 meters high, topped with barbed wire and broken glass. Dom Sierot, Korczak's orphanage, is now trapped inside. The gates close. The ghetto is sealed. And life as they knew it is over. Inside those walls, a new reality takes shape, a reality of hunger, disease, and death. The Nazis control the food supply. Rations are set at just over 180 calories per person per day. That's less than a single bagel. People begin to starve. Bodies appear on the sidewalks every morning covered with newspapers. Children with swollen bellies wander the streets begging for bread. The ghetto becomes an open-air cemetery. And in the middle of this horror, Janusz Korczak makes a decision. He will not let his children become another statistic. He will not let them die alone. He will fight for every scrap of food, every moment of dignity, every second of childhood they have left. But what he doesn't know yet is that the worst is still to come. Korczak transforms the orphanage into a fortress of sanity in a world gone mad. Every morning he wakes the children with music. He organizes classes, theater performances, and games. He refuses to let the ghetto steal their childhood. But reality is brutal. Food is scarce. The black market prices are astronomical. A loaf of bread costs what a family would earn in a month before the war. Korczak sells everything he owns: his books, his furniture, his medical instruments. He goes out into the ghetto streets every day, knocking on doors, begging for donations, trading his dignity for a few potatoes, a bit of flour, anything to keep his children alive. He returns each night exhausted, his coat covered in snow in winter, his face gaunt from malnutrition. He gives his own food rations to the children. When they ask why he doesn't eat, he smiles and tells them he already had his meal. It's a lie. But it's a lie born of love. The ghetto operates under a cruel hierarchy. The Judenrat, the Jewish council appointed by the Nazis, tries to maintain order and negotiate for better conditions. But everyone knows the truth. The Nazis don't negotiate. They demand, they take, they kill. In July 1942, the deportations begin. The gross action Warsaw, the great action. It sounds clinical, bureaucratic, but what it means is simple. The systematic emptying of the ghetto. Every day the Nazis round up thousands of people. They are told they're being relocated to work camps in the east. They are told to bring only what they can carry. They are herded into cattle cars at the Umschlagplatz, the collection point, and shipped away. No one who leaves ever comes back. No letters arrive. No news filters through. The ghetto begins to understand. This is not relocation. This is extermination. Panic spreads like wildfire. Families hide in attics, in cellars, in false walls built overnight. The Nazis respond with violence. They shoot anyone who resists. They shoot anyone who moves too slowly. They shoot children in the streets as examples. The quota must be met. 6,000 people per day, sometimes 7,000, sometimes more. The Umschlagplatz becomes a portal to hell. And every day Korczak watches the trains leave, knowing that his orphanage will not be spared forever. Then, on the morning of August 5th, 1942, the order arrives. A group of Nazi soldiers and Jewish police officers surround Dom Zero. The children are to be deported, all of them, today, immediately. Korczak is given a choice. He is known. He is respected, even by some of the Nazi officers who have read his books before the war. They offer him an exemption. He can stay. He can save himself. One officer even suggests he could be useful, that his skills as a doctor are needed in the ghetto. But Korczak doesn't hesitate. He tells them no. If the children go, he goes. There is no discussion. There is no negotiation. His decision is final. Word spreads quickly through the ghetto. Korczak is going with his children. People line the streets as the procession begins. They watch in stunned silence as this man, this living symbol of dignity and resistance, leads 200 orphans toward the Umschlagplatz, toward the trains, toward death. And he does it with his head held high, refusing to let fear win. But what happens in those final hours, what Korczak says to his children, and how he prepares them for what's coming, is something you need to understand. Because this is where the story becomes more than just tragedy. This is where it becomes legend. The night before the deportation, Korczak knows what's coming. He can feel it in his bones. The soldiers have been circling closer. The quotas are getting harder to meet. The Nazis are running out of easy targets. He gathers his staff, the teachers and caretakers who have stayed with him through everything. They speak in hushed voices in his small office. Some beg him to reconsider, to accept the exemption, to live. But Korczak is calm. He tells them that a shepherd does not abandon his flock. He tells them that these children have already lost everything, their parents, their homes, their sense of safety. He will not let them lose their last anchor to love. He will not let them face death alone and terrified. If this is the end, he will make sure they cross that threshold with dignity, surrounded by the only family they have left. That night, he doesn't sleep. He walks through the dormitories, watching his children breathe in their beds. Some are as young as 3 years old. Others are teenagers, old enough to understand what the trains mean. He touches their heads gently. He whispers prayers in the darkness. He thinks about all the years he spent advocating for children's rights, writing books about respecting their voices, their fears, their dreams. And now, all of that philosophy comes down to this single act. He cannot save their lives, but he can save their deaths. He can make sure they do not die in terror, clawing and screaming. He can give them peace. And that is what he decides to do. When morning comes, the soldiers arrive. They shout orders. They bang on doors with their rifle butts. The children wake up confused and frightened. But Korczak is ready. He has already prepared them in the only way he knows how. He tells them they are going on a trip, a journey to the countryside. He tells them to put on their best clothes, to bring their favorite toy or book. He organizes them into lines, the older children holding the hands of the younger ones. He raises a green flag, the flag of King Mat I, the hero from his most famous children's book. A story about a boy king who tried to make the world better. The children recognize it immediately. Some of them smile. They trust him, they always have. The procession begins, 200 children walking in neat rows. Korczak at the front, wearing his old Polish army uniform, polished boots and his worn doctor's coat. Behind him, his closest assistant, Stefania Wilczynska, a woman who has dedicated her life to these children and who also refuses to leave them. The streets of the ghetto are lined with people. Thousands of faces, hollow-eyed and starving, watch in silence. Some weep openly, some cover their mouths in horror. Others stand frozen, unable to process what they are seeing. This is not a roundup, this is not chaos. This is an organized march toward death, led by a man who could have escaped but chose not to. One witness, a ghetto resident named Joshua Pearl, will later write about what he saw that day. He describes Korczak walking with his head up, his eyes forward, holding the hand of a small child. He describes the children singing. Korczak has taught them a song for the journey, a marching song, something to keep their spirits up, something to drown out the fear. The witness writes that he has never seen anything like it, that in the middle of unspeakable evil, here is an act of unspeakable love. And he knows, as everyone watching knows, that they are witnessing something that will echo through history, if anyone survives to tell it. The march to the Umschlagplatz takes nearly an hour. The square is already packed with thousands of people, men, women, children, the elderly, all waiting for the trains. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and human waste. There are no bathrooms, no water. People have been standing here for hours, some since the night before. Nazi guards patrol the perimeter with dogs and whips. Anyone who tries to escape is shot on sight. The bodies are left where they fall as warnings. This is the last place most of these people will ever see in Warsaw. And they know it. Korczak leads his children through the crowd. He keeps them together, keeps them moving, keeps them focused on him. He doesn't let them look at the bodies. He doesn't let them see the desperation in the faces around them. He positions himself as a shield, absorbing the horror so they don't have to. When they reach their assigned area, he sits down on the ground and the children gather around him in a circle. He begins to tell them a story, the same stories he has told them 1,000 times before, stories of adventure, of bravery, of King Mat, who never gave up even when the whole world was against him. The children listen, their eyes locked on his face. Some of them are crying quietly. Others seem strangely calm, as if they have already accepted what's coming, and perhaps they have. Perhaps Korczak's presence has given them that gift, the gift of acceptance without terror. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher. The heat becomes unbearable. There is still no water. Children begin to faint. Adults collapse. The Nazis don't care. They pace back and forth, checking their watches, waiting for the trains. Finally, in the early afternoon, the sound comes, the screech of metal on metal, the hiss of steam. The train pulls into the station. It's not a passenger train. It's a freight train. Cattle cars with wooden slats and barred windows. Each car is designed to hold 40 people comfortably. The Nazis will pack in 150, sometimes more. There is no room to sit, barely room to stand. And the journey to Treblinka will take hours in the August heat. The loading begins. Guards shout and push people toward the cars. Families are separated. Children are torn from their parents' arms. The screaming is deafening. But when Korczak's group is called, something different happens. They move as one unit. No one panics, no one runs. The children hold hands and walk toward the train cars in their neat rows, just as they walk through the ghetto streets. Korczak climbs into the car first, then helps each child up. One by one, he counts them. He makes sure every single one of his 200 children is accounted for. Stefania is with him, doing the same. They position themselves in the center of the car, surrounded by children, creating a small pocket of calm in the chaos. A Nazi officer approaches the car before it's sealed. He recognizes Korczak. Some say he was a reader of his books before the war. He offers one final time. Get out. Save yourself. You've done enough. But Korczak looks at him with an expression that the officer will never forget. It's not anger. It's not hatred. It's pity. Pity for a man who still doesn't understand what love means. Korczak says nothing. He simply turns back to his children. The officer steps away. The doors slam shut, the bolt slides into place, and the train begins to move. Inside the cattle car, darkness swallows everything. The only light comes through the narrow gaps between the wooden slats. The air is already stifling. Bodies pressed against bodies. The smell of fear and sweat mixing with the dust from the floor. Children begin to cry. Some call out for water. Others ask when they will arrive. Korczak's voice cuts through the panic. Steady, calm, authoritative. He begins to sing, a lullaby, something soft and familiar, something their mothers might have sung to them before the war stole everything away. Stefania joins him. Then, slowly, some of the children begin to hum along. Not all of them. Some are too frightened, some are too weak. But enough. Enough to create a sound that drowns out the clatter of the wheels and the crying from the other cars. The journey to Treblinka is roughly 60 miles northeast of Warsaw. Under normal circumstances, it would take 2 hours by train. But these are not normal circumstances. The train stops frequently, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. No explanation is given, no water is provided. The heat inside the cars becomes unbearable. People faint, children vomit, the elderly collapse. In other cars, people are dying, their bodies held upright by the sheer press of the crowd. There is nowhere for them to fall. But in Korczak's car, he continues to fight for every moment of peace he can give his children. He tells them to breathe slowly, to close their eyes, to think of their favorite place, a park, a garden, a room filled with sunlight. He makes them remember joy, even here, even now. Some survivors from other cars will later testify about what they heard during those journeys. They speak of screaming that never stopped, of people clawing at the walls until their fingernails broke, of mothers suffocating their own babies to end their suffering. But they also speak of one car that was different, one car where they heard singing, where they heard a man's voice, strong and unwavering, telling stories, where they heard children responding, not with screams but with words, with questions, with the sounds of childhood that had no place in that hell. They didn't know who was in that car, but they knew it was something sacred, something the Nazis could not touch. Finally, after hours that feel like days, the train begins to slow. The brakes screech. The car lurches to a stop. Through the slats, some of the older children can see where they are. A platform, guard towers, barbed wire stretching in every direction, signs that read Treblinka. They have arrived. The doors are thrown open. Light floods in, blinding after hours of darkness. Guards shout commands in German. Get out. Move faster. Leave everything behind. Whips crack. Dogs bark. The chaos is immediate and overwhelming, but Korczak is ready. He steps out first, then turns to help each child down. He keeps them together. He keeps them moving. He does not let them scatter. The selection process at Treblinka is a formality. There is no real selection here like at Auschwitz. Everyone who arrives goes to the same place, the gas chambers. But the Nazis maintain the illusion. They tell people they are going to shower, to be deloused, to be registered for work. Signs point toward the bathhouses. Guards smile and speak in calm voices. They have perfected the art of deception. And for most people, desperate to believe anything other than the truth, the lie is enough. But Korczak knows. He has always known. And now, standing on the platform of Treblinka with his 200 children surrounding him, he must make his final decision. Does he tell them the truth, or does he let them believe the lie until the very end? Korczak chooses mercy. He gathers the children close and tells them they are going to take a bath, a real bath, with warm water and soap, something they haven't had in months. The younger children brighten at this. They ask if there will be towels, if they can play afterward. Korczak nods. Yes. Everything will be fine. The older children, the ones who are 12, 13, 14 years old, they look at him differently. Their eyes search his face for the truth. And in that moment, in the way he holds their gaze, they understand. He is lying, but it is a lie given out of love, a lie to spare them the terror of knowing. Some of them accept it. They take the hands of the younger ones and help guide them forward. Others silently weep, but they do not speak. They do not shatter the illusion for the little ones. They follow Korczak's lead, even now, even here, at the very edge of existence. The path to the gas chambers is called the Himmelstrasse, the road to heaven. It is a narrow corridor about 150 yards long, lined on both sides with barbed wire fences covered in pine branches to hide what lies beyond. Flowers have been planted along the edges. There are signs encouraging people to move quickly, to not hold up the line. The Nazis have designed it to be calming, almost pleasant, a final cruelty, a last mockery. Korczak walks this road with his children. He points out the flowers to the youngest ones. He asks them what colors they see: red, yellow, white. They answer him, their small voices fragile in the heavy air. Stefania walks beside him, holding hands with two little girls. Behind them, the other children follow in pairs, just as they did in the ghetto streets. An orderly procession, a march of innocence toward annihilation. At the end of the Himmelstrasse stands a building. It looks like a bathhouse. Brick walls, a red tile roof, windows with curtains. But the windows are fake, painted on. There is no glass. Inside, there are no showers, only pipes that will release carbon monoxide from diesel engines. The chambers can hold 200 people at a time, sometimes more. The Nazis have this down to a science. From arrival to death takes less than 2 hours. From death to cremation, another few hours. By nightfall, every trace of these people will be ash scattered in the surrounding forest. They will become nothing, forgotten, erased from history. Except they won't. Because what Korczak is about to do will be remembered, not by the Nazis, not by official records, but by the handful of Jewish workers forced to operate Treblinka, who will survive and tell the world what they witnessed. The group reaches the entrance to the building. Nazi guards stand at the doors, directing people inside. They are efficient, emotionless. This is routine for them. Just another transport. Just another day. But then they see Korczak. One of the guards, an SS officer named Franz Stangl, later identified as the commandant of Treblinka, watches this old man in his worn uniform leading these children. He watches how the children cling to him, how they trust him. And for a brief moment, something flickers across Stangl's face. Not regret, not shame, but recognition. Recognition that he is witnessing something extraordinary, something his entire ideology cannot explain or destroy. Korczak reaches the doorway. He can see inside now. He can see the concrete floor, the metal pipes along the ceiling, the drains in the corners. He knows exactly what this room is. But he does not stop. He does not falter. He turns to his children one last time. He smiles at them. He tells them to stay together, to hold hands, to remember that they are loved. And then, with two small children gripping his hands tightly, Janusz Korczak steps through the doorway. The children follow, all 200 of them, filing into the chamber, trusting him until the very last breath. The doors close behind them. The bolts slide shut. And outside, the engines start. What happens inside a gas chamber at Treblinka is not something history records in detail. The Nazis destroyed most of the evidence. They burned the documents. They dismantled the buildings. They executed the witnesses. But we know enough. We know that death is not instant. We know that it takes between 15 and 30 minutes. We know that people die standing up because there is no room to fall. We know that the strongest survive the longest, suffocating slowly as the air becomes toxic. And we know that children, with their smaller lungs and faster breathing, die first. This is the reality. This is the truth that Korczak walked into with his eyes wide open. But here is what the survivors say. The Jewish workers who were forced to open those doors after the gas stopped, the men who had to drag out the bodies and burn them. They say that when they opened the chamber that held Korczak and his children, they found something they had never seen before. Usually the bodies are tangled together in a desperate pile near the door. People claw over each other trying to reach air that doesn't exist. Fingernails are embedded in the walls. Faces are frozen in expressions of pure terror. But in this chamber, the workers found the children arranged in small groups, the older ones holding the younger ones. And in the center they found Korczak, sitting down, surrounded by children, his arms around two of the smallest ones. His face was calm, almost peaceful, as if, even in death, he had managed to protect them from fear. One of these workers, a man named Abraham Krzepicki, managed to escape Treblinka and later gave testimony. He described what he saw. He said that Korczak must have spent those final minutes doing exactly what he had done his entire life: teaching, comforting, loving. Krzepicki believed that Korczak told stories until the very end, that he kept the children focused on his voice, that he made them close their eyes and imagine something beautiful, and that when the gas came, when the burning started in their lungs and the dizziness began, they were not thinking about death. They were thinking about King Matt, about summer days, about the sound of Korczak's voice promising them that everything would be all right. Krzepicki wept as he told this story. He said that in 3 years of witnessing unimaginable horror at Treblinka, this was the one moment that broke him completely, because it proved that even here, even in the darkest corner of human evil, love could still exist. And that terrified the Nazis more than any act of violence ever could. The bodies were removed. They were taken to the massive pits where the cremations took place. Thousands of bodies burned every day, the smoke visible for miles, the smell unmistakable. Korczak's body was thrown onto the pile with the others, his uniform burned away, his bones turned to ash. There was no grave, no marker, no ceremony. The Nazis wanted him to disappear, to become just another number in the 6 million, just another forgotten victim. And for a long time it worked. After the war, when the world began to count the dead and memorialize the lost, Korczak's name did not appear on the major monuments. His story was not taught in schools. He became a footnote, a minor character in a tragedy so vast that individual heroes seemed almost irrelevant. But the truth has a way of surviving. The workers who escaped Treblinka told their stories. The residents of the Warsaw Ghetto who witnessed the march wrote it down. The people who knew Korczak, who read his books, who understood what he represented, they refused to let him be forgotten. Slowly, over decades, his story began to emerge, first in Poland, then in Israel, then around the world. Books were written, films were made, memorials were erected. And people began to ask the question that haunts us still. Why? Why would a man choose to die when he could live? Why would he walk into a gas chamber when he could escape? What kind of person makes that choice? The answer is not simple. It is not about heroism in the traditional sense. Korczak was not trying to save anyone. He could not stop the trains. He could not change history. What he could do was refuse to let his children face death alone. He could give them the one thing the Nazis tried to take from every victim: dignity, agency, love. In a system designed to strip humanity away piece by piece, Korczak gave his children the greatest gift possible. He gave them himself, until the very end. And that choice, that single act of defiance wrapped in tenderness, is why we remember him today. Not as a victim, but as a man who proved that even in hell, goodness can survive. After the war ended in 1945, the world was confronted with the full scale of the Holocaust. The concentration camps were liberated, the gas chambers were exposed, the mass graves were uncovered. Millions of stories emerged, stories of suffering beyond comprehension, stories of survival against impossible odds, and stories of those who did not survive, but whose actions in their final moments revealed the absolute depths of human courage. Korczak's story was one of them, but it took time for the world to listen. The immediate aftermath of the war was chaos. Refugees flooded across Europe. Families searched desperately for lost relatives. Trials began for Nazi war criminals. And in the midst of all this, the story of a teacher who died with his students seemed almost too painful to process, too personal, too intimate. The world needed heroes who fought back, who resisted with weapons and strategy. Korczak's resistance was quieter, and that made it easy to overlook. But in Poland, his name never disappeared. The survivors who returned to Warsaw spoke of him with reverence. They told their children and grandchildren about the man who refused to abandon his orphans. Teachers began to share his books again, the ones the Nazis had banned. His writings on children's rights, on treating young people with respect and dignity, started to circulate once more. In 1947, a memorial plaque was placed at the site where Dom Siero once stood. The building itself had been destroyed during the Warsaw Uprising. The ghetto had been leveled, erased from the map, but the plaque remained, a small stone marker with his name and the names of his children. It was not much, but it was a beginning, a recognition that what happened there mattered, that Korczak's choice mattered. In 1971, the Israeli director WWII made a film about Korczak. It was not a Hollywood production. There were no famous actors, no big budget, but it was honest. It showed the ghetto as it really was. It showed Korczak as he really was. Not a saint, not a perfect man, but a human being who struggled with despair and doubt and fear, and who chose love anyway. The film was screened at festivals around the world. Critics praised it. Audiences wept. And slowly Korczak's story began to reach people who had never heard of him. Parents watched it and thought about what they would do in that situation. Teachers watched it and thought about their responsibility to their students. And everyone who watched it asked themselves the same question. Could I do what he did? Could I choose death to spare someone else from dying alone? In 1978, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, declared Korczak the year of his commemoration. They called him a champion of children's rights, a pioneer of progressive education, a martyr who gave his life for his principles. Schools around the world began to bear his name, in Poland, in Israel, in Germany, in France, in the United States. Parents named their children after him. Organizations dedicated to child welfare adopted his philosophy. His most famous book, King Mat I, was translated into dozens of languages, and a new generation discovered his message. Their children are not property. They are not incomplete adults. They are people, full, complex, deserving of respect and voice and love. But here is what is remarkable. Despite all of this recognition, despite the memorials and the films and the schools named in his honor, most people still do not know his story. If you walk the streets of any major city and ask random people who Janusz Korczak was, the vast majority will have no idea. His name has not entered the collective consciousness the way Anne Frank's has. His story is not taught in most history classes, and that is the tragedy, because what Korczak did is not just a historical footnote, it is a lesson about what it means to love without condition, to give without expectation, to face evil with dignity instead of despair. There is a statue of Korczak in Warsaw today. It stands in the Jewish cemetery near the Ghetto Memorial. The statue shows him walking, surrounded by children, just as he did on that August morning in 1942. His hand rests on the head of a small child. His face is calm, determined, at peace. People visit this statue. They leave flowers, they light candles, they stand in silence and think about what this man did, and some of them cry, not just because of the tragedy, but because in the middle of history's darkest chapter, here was proof that humanity could still shine, that love could still matter, that one person's choice could echo across generations, and that is the real story, not the death, but the life, not the gas chamber, but the march toward it, not the ending, but the refusal to let that ending define everything that came before. Here is what makes Korczak's story even more powerful. He wrote about this choice before it ever happened, years before the war, years before the ghetto, years before Treblinka. In his diary, which was found after the war, there are entries from the 1930s where he wrestles with the question of what a teacher owes to their students. He writes about responsibility, about the bond between an adult and a child, about how that bond is sacred, unbreakable, even in the face of danger. In one entry from 1934, he writes that if his orphanage ever caught fire, he would not save himself until every child was out. He writes that a shepherd who runs when wolves come is not a shepherd at all. He is a coward wearing a shepherd's clothes. These were not empty words. These were principles he had already decided to live by. And when the moment came, when the wolves arrived in the form of Nazi soldiers, he did exactly what he said he would do. This is important because it means Korczak's final act was not a spontaneous decision made under pressure. It was not a moment of temporary insanity or emotional breakdown. It was the culmination of an entire philosophy of life, a philosophy built over decades of working with children, of watching them suffer, of understanding that the most vulnerable people in any society are the ones who need protection the most, and that adults, especially those in positions of care and authority, have an obligation that goes beyond law or convenience. An obligation that is moral, absolute, non-negotiable. Korczak believed that if you take responsibility for a child, you take responsibility for their entire existence. You do not get to choose which parts. You do not get to be there for the easy moments and disappear when things get hard. You are there, always, until the end. This philosophy is radical. Even today, think about how many people in positions of authority abandon their responsibilities when the stakes get too high. Teachers who leave failing schools, politicians who flee during crises, parents who walk away when raising a child becomes too difficult. We see it constantly. And we understand it. Because survival is instinctual, self-preservation is natural, no one blames someone for wanting to live. But Korczak challenges that. He asks a harder question. What are you willing to die for? What matters more than your own survival? And for him the answer was clear. His children mattered more, their fear mattered more than his life. Their need to not die alone mattered more than his need to survive. That is not natural. That is not instinctual. That is a choice. A conscious, deliberate, impossible choice. And he made it. Now think about the Nazis for a moment. Their entire ideology was built on the idea that some lives matter more than others. That strength is the highest virtue. That weakness should be eliminated. That compassion is a flaw to be purged. They created a system designed to strip away humanity, to reduce people to numbers, to make death industrial and efficient. And in the middle of that system, here comes a man who walks hand in hand with children into a gas chamber, who refuses to value his life above theirs, who treats them with dignity even when the entire apparatus of the state is screaming that they are worthless. Do you understand what that does? It breaks the system. Not physically. Korczak did not stop the trains. He did not liberate the camps. But he proved that the system was a lie, that all of its power, all of its violence, all of its cruelty could not destroy the one thing that makes us human, the ability to love, the ability to choose someone else over ourselves. The Nazis murdered Korczak's body, but they could not murder what he represented. And that is why they lost. Not militarily, but morally. Forever. There is a concept in Jewish tradition called Kiddush Hashem. It means sanctification of the name. It refers to actions that bring honor to God and humanity through self-sacrifice and moral courage. Throughout history, rabbis and scholars have debated what qualifies. Is it dying for your faith? Is it living according to your principles even when it costs you everything? Korczak's act has been debated in this context. Some say he sanctified life itself by refusing to let those children die in terror. Others say he sanctified the idea that every human being, no matter how young or how powerless, deserves dignity. But everyone agrees on one thing. What he did was holy, not in a religious sense necessarily, but in a human sense. He took the worst moment imaginable and transformed it into something transcendent, something that proves we are more than our circumstances, more than our fear, more than our desire to survive. And this is why his story cannot be forgotten. This is why it needs to be told again and again, because the world is still full of people who believe that power matters more than compassion, that survival justifies any compromise, that the weak deserve whatever happens to them. Korczak's story is the answer to all of that. It is proof that one person, armed with nothing but love and conviction, can stand against an empire of evil and win, not by destroying it, but by refusing to let it define what it means to be human. He walked into that gas chamber, but he walked in as a free man. The Nazis were the prisoners, prisoners of their own hatred, their own emptiness, their own inability to understand what Korczak knew in his bones. That love is stronger than death. Always, forever, without exception. So here we are. 83 years after that August morning. 83 years after Janusz Korczak walked down the streets of the Warsaw Ghetto with 200 children, leading them toward trains that would carry them to Treblinka. And the question remains, why don't we know his name the way we know other names from the Holocaust? Why isn't his story taught in every school? Why isn't his face on the covers of history books? The answer is uncomfortable. His story doesn't fit the narrative we prefer. We like stories of armed resistance, of underground fighters and daring escapes, of survivors who outwit the enemy and live to tell the tale. We like victories, even small ones. Korczak's story has no victory. Not in the traditional sense. He died, his children died. The Nazis won that day, and we don't like to sit with that reality. We don't like to admit that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is lose with grace. But that discomfort is exactly why this story matters, because life is not always about winning. Life is not always about survival. Sometimes life is about how you face the moments when you have no control, when the outcome is inevitable, when all you have left is your choice of how to meet it. Korczak could have spent his final hours in rage, in despair, in bitterness at the injustice of it all, and no one would have blamed him. Instead, he spent those hours comforting children, singing to them, holding their hands, making sure that their last experience on this earth was not terror but love. That is not a footnote, that is not a minor detail. That is everything. That is the entire point of being human. And the fact that most people don't know this story is a failure. A failure of our education system, a failure of our collective memory, a failure to recognize that the quietest acts of love are often the loudest acts of resistance. There is a movement now, small but growing, to change this. Educators around the world are beginning to include Korczak in their Holocaust curriculum, not as a side note, but as a central figure, someone whose philosophy of children's rights was decades ahead of its time, someone whose writings on education influenced thinkers from Paulo Freire to Bruno Bettelheim, someone whose life's work was about giving children a voice, and whose death was about making sure that voice was never silenced by fear. In 2012, on the 70th anniversary of his death, Poland declared it the year of Janusz Korczak. Conferences were held, new biographies were published. His orphanage was virtually reconstructed so people could walk through it and understand how revolutionary his ideas were. And more people began to ask, who was this man? What can he teach us today? The answer is everything. He can teach us that strength is not about dominating others. It's about protecting them. He can teach us that courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. He can teach us that the measure of a society is not how it treats its most powerful members. It's how it treats its most vulnerable. And he can teach us that in the darkest moments, when everything has been taken away, you still have one choice left: how you love. The Nazis could take his freedom. They could take his home. They could take his life. But they could not take his ability to choose love over fear. And that choice echoes across time. It reaches us today. It asks us, what would you choose? When the world is cruel, when the odds are impossible, when no one would blame you for looking away, what would you choose? Korczak chose his children. 200 times over, he chose them when it was hard. He chose them when it was dangerous. And he chose them when it cost him everything. There is no Hollywood ending here. There is no last-minute rescue. There is no miracle. There is only a man, an orphanage full of children, and a decision that defines what it means to be human. The Nazis tried to erase him. They tried to erase all of them. They burned the bodies. They destroyed the records. They built a forest over Treblinka, so no one would ever know what happened there. But they failed. Because stories like this don't die. They survive in the testimony of witnesses, in the writings left behind, in the memories passed from generation to generation, and in moments like this, when someone tells you the truth, that on August 5th, 1942, a teacher named Janusz Korczak entered a gas chamber holding the hands of 2 children, surrounded by 200 more, and proved that even in hell, love is stronger than death. That is his legacy. Not tragedy, not victimhood, not a sad story to make you feel grateful for your own life. His legacy is a challenge to every person who hears his name, to live with that kind of conviction, to love with that kind of courage, to understand that what we do in our darkest moments defines us more than anything we do in the light. Janusz Korczak could have saved himself. He chose not to. And that choice, that impossible, beautiful, heartbreaking choice, is why we remember him, why we must remember him, why his story can never be allowed to fade. Because as long as we tell it, as long as we speak his name, the Nazis have not won. Love has, and it always will.